our MotorCities 2023 grant training. You are in the right place. So welcome, and we're going to get going with a little bit of introduction to who we are for some who are not familiar, because sometimes we have our grant training and we have a mixture of organizations and folks who have worked with us in the past, and then we have people who are new to the process, which is great to see and great to hear, but you need to kind of be introduced and make sure everyone knows. And then when we get done with that, we're going to get to know each other before we get deep into the grant making process. So welcome everyone to the 2023-24 grant training, and I'm going to share my screen. We're going to learn today about the process of applying for a MotorCities grant, all the things that it entails and how it will work with you as far as your schedules and your projects. So we ask again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. But with that being said, we're going to get started. So right away, our MotorCities grant program, I'm going to talk about the grant program in general. Know that we have two programs. We have our challenge grant program, which you see on the screen, and primarily what I'll be stepping you through is our 20% match program. That means that we will provide up to 20% of a project's expense. If you're spending $100,000 on a project, we can give you $20,000. That's the math. So you'll hear me talk about that, and that is primarily what I'm referring to. That usually services our bigger projects. We also have our mini grant program, which is a $1,500 non-matching program. So it's for smaller projects that need the quick infusion of funds to get signage done, to get some of the things that you've heard earlier for those who introduce themselves. So to get those smaller projects going, signage and brochures and conferences and meetings and activities that we could help to support. So just know that I'm referring to the grant program, but both of those are nested in there. So it depends on which one you are applying to. We can certainly talk about the specifics. But our challenge grant program is that 20% match we reimburse. Remember that all of our grant funds are funded by the National Park Service. So as I mentioned earlier, we are an affiliate program. Officially, we are a National Heritage Area system of the National Park Service. So we are part of their money. It is government funding, means it's government funding. It means that it comes with all of the related strings that are attached to that. So we have to make sure that we are crossing T's and dotting I's for those who are working on preservation related projects. You're familiar with Section 106 requirements and what you need to do to make sure that your property is abiding by that. So all those things are true about our grant process as well. And our grant funds are awarded and based on our fiscal year, which is October 1st to September 30th. I'll explain a little more about the timing, but just realize that our budget that we give the grant funds out of renews October 1st. So that's usually the perspective that we have. That's why we hold the grant training in the summer for those who are ramping up towards it and get ready to apply. And then we kind of go throughout the year, granting those funds out until there aren't any left. To give you a quick snapshot, MotorCities began granting almost right after we got started. 1998, we were formed into law in November of 98. So basically 99, 2000, we were getting the organization together, our management plan, et cetera, and activated it. And in 2002, we started granting out funds, and we've been doing it ever since. So we've granted about $1.6 million to 300 plus programs. And you all, many of you heard on the call, you all have leveraged those funds into more than closer to $6 million in community activity. So it shows you what happens when you sort of invest in community and in partnership, that you're able to leverage those funds out there in the community. I'm using the term 2024. As I said, our fiscal year starts October 1st, so we've got to look at it that way. So we are talking 2024 here. And our 2024 focus areas, as I mentioned, are projects that exemplify diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So some projects we've heard today are already great candidates for that in maybe a historic site or with a program that allows accessibility and access to groups that may have not previously had it, or exemplifies the different stories that you can get out of the automobile industry. If you want to know more about sort of our perspective on that, visit our Many Voices, One Story section of our website, because it shows some of the stories we've spoken about. Stories of women, stories of African Americans, studies of Arab Americans or LGBTQ plus communities. So all of those are relevant. And just think about that as you go through. We're not saying force your project to fit that. We're saying that those are projects that we are giving additional consideration. So our grant committee will look at it that way. And this year, our grant committee will also be looking at needs-based granting. So in some cases, they will be evaluating the grants in a competitive way that says, how is this organization's budget function? How does our grant support what they're doing? Do they need it as much as organization B or C that's also applying? So they will be using it, a bit of a matrix there. Again, it's not to penalize programs that are solid, not to penalize those of you who are really productive and have been familiar with us for many years, but it's to give everyone equal opportunity at the grant. So they'll be looking at it that way, that if it comes down to it, they'll look at a project and say, is this $1,500 enough to get this project over the edge versus $1,500 is just a drop in a bigger bucket for another organization. But again, keep that in mind. So we go through quickly to identify whether or not you fit the criteria for the heritage areas granting. So are you a recognized nonprofit organization, government entity, or educational institution? I think we had a little bit of all of them on our call today, from cities and townships to nonprofits and museums to even our educational institutions, someone like Schoolcraft. So the question is, do you fit that? And I think the answer is yes. Do you have a project that is designed to highlight the rich auto and labor heritage of our region? So again, we would hope that all of you are tuning in for that reason. We don't want to have projects that go too far afield of automotive, though you may be supporting community and tangentially related to automotive. We want to make sure the project really highlights our automotive and labor heritage stories. So if that's the case, then we are 2 for 2. Do you have one that fits into the completion timeline by 2024? And what I mean for that is, and I'll explain it in a few slides as well. We have a requirement that you complete the project for challenge grants within 1 year of your application. So if you apply today and it gets awarded in a few weeks, then you'll have a year from that to complete the project. For mini grants, they do have to fit within that fiscal year. We're granting out of our fiscal year, so that means that a mini grant, the $1,500 grants have to be between October 1st and September 30th. So I don't want to make it too confusing, but that is what we're looking for. Can you complete the project within that period of time? So we're almost there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with membership having its privileges, we do want anyone who is going to be supported by MotorCities Grant to be a MotorCities member. We only grant to these organizations, as I mentioned earlier. And so you would have to be a member of our organization to be eligible for those grants. So if we check all those boxes, then it means you are eligible, you're in the right place, you've made it through this first half of the grant training, and welcome to the party. So we are ready to rock and roll with our grant training, and let's see what next steps are. So online application, it's online only. This may be news to some, but in the past, you may mail a big grant application in and mail it in a big printed package, but we are online only. So you'll find the entire grant application at motorcities.org/grants. Both the challenge grants and the mini grants are there, slightly different in their application, but there. And I'll mention deadline for the mini grants, because that's the one that we award this time of year, because we want to get them all out there. Usually they're the ones that are most sought after, because they're no match, they're smaller grants, they can make a huge impact. That deadline is Monday, August 15th. And then our other grant program is a rolling submission. So you can apply at any time. And I'll explain the schedule as we get a little further down. But you can apply at any time for our challenge grant program. So anytime you want to apply, it'll be reviewed whenever our next cycle. We usually review once a quarter and to get the award information out there. So if you're looking at mini grants by August 15th, if you're a challenge grant, whenever you're ready, get it in and we'll let you know when the next review cycle is. And again, I'll explain the dates a little more. So with all that preamble out of the way, and we meeting and greeting, and you know us, and I know you, let's get to what we came for, which is the form. So we want to talk about the forms and how to fill it out. So we're going to step through basically what you'll see on our MotorCities website, remembering that we've got 2 programs. They're both very similar. The forms are very similar. The mini grant form is a little simpler than the challenge grant because it's less money. We don't want to make it prohibitive. So the mini grant one is a little simpler. But so for the purpose of really digging deep into it, we'll be stepping through the challenge grant application. But just remember, a lot of this information that we'll have to gather will be similar for both. So the application starts off with you having identified the project. So what is it that you're working on? Some of you have shared your specifics already, but we want to drill it down to, we're building a gazebo. We're putting a roof on our building. We're putting up signage about this. We want to do an exhibit on X, Y, or Z. And so that is your project name. And then you want to identify a start date and an end date. As I mentioned, it needs to be within a year, right? So if you apply August 1st, then we need a project that's going to end by next August, just so we can put it sort of in nice, neat package as far as when we're going to fund it. It makes a difference in the National Park Service whether our project involves a National Historic Landmark. And some of you are or were, Jill Wilbur just joined us from the Fort Pickett Avenue plant, for example, National Historic Landmark. So not just a cool museum, not just a great stop, not just a Michigan historic place, not even on the National Registry, but that rarefied air of a National Historic Landmark. And they always want to be informed when, things are happening with their National Historic Landmarks. So we usually make sure we communicate that out. Of course, the Henry Ford Estate, another one. So that's an example of a little piece of information that we can get there. You are the partner organization, so the application will be coming from your organization, and that's what needs to be going there. And the organization's tax ID, so that will be checked, of course, to make sure that everything is valid and lines up, because we can only grant to these nonprofits, organizations, and all the others that I described. So we need to make sure our tax IDs match up. Being a MotorCities member, as I said, is necessary. So you want to make sure that you are a member as you apply, or as you receive a grant, that you are a member throughout the administration of that grant. So you need to maintain your membership for at least that year. And, again, we think that having an investment in the organization shows that you are here for the long haul, and many of you have been, so shouldn't be an issue. We do categorize them based on the mission area. So the one that you'll see immediately is education. And again, the other two, preservation and tourism, will also drop down. So whichever one you think you fall into, we want to make sure you categorize yourself there. Then we get into questions about the individuals. These are people who are authorized to act on your behalf for a grant. So the authorizing official is the person designated to sign agreements. Sometimes that person in an organization is the same. Sometimes that person is completely different. You are the development director, but the executive director has to sign the agreement, or the president of the board, or the city council, or the city has to sign the agreement. So you want to identify who it is that is truly the authorizer, because that's who will get the agreement when the time comes. Then you come down to the project contact. Again, that could be very different, because that could be the person that I'm going to be interacting with throughout the process. So that could be, it could be you, or it could be someone else in your organization. But that's the person that if I have a question about how things are going, if you want to reach out to me and say, this is what's happening with our project, we want to identify who that main project contact is. And then the fiscal contact. Again, all these could be the same, but some organizations have a treasurer, or a CFO, or a financial bookkeeper, or the person that holds the shoebox, or whatever. There's going to be somebody who's going to keep up with the financials of the organization. If it's one and the same, that's fine, but we need to have them identified there, because this is the person that we contact about, what's going on with this invoice or this check, or we mailed the payment out to you. So the fiscal contact is that person who we want to identify there. Those are all common questions. Then we look at budget. So what you want to identify here is your total project cost. For sake of example, we're going to put a roof on our historic building. The project is going to cost us $125,000. So you put that total project cost in there, and you know what it is. The total eligible cost. Why is that different than the total project cost? We are a nonprofit affiliated with the National Park Service. This is government money. So there are certain things that they will not allow us to fund. So if your project is going to cost you $125,000, but $25,000 of that is for your fundraising, is for your meet and greets, is for your schmoozing with funders and supporters, you've got to take that off of this number, because we cannot support that. If you got a project that's $125,000, but the first part of it is a big banquet that you're going to, say, hey, everyone come on in and give to our project. We can't support fundraising. We can't support sort of food and booze, as they say. We can't support that sort of thing, because it's so arbitrary. And unfortunately, it's not a direct connection to the project. So keep that in mind and make sure it's listed there, but it can't be fundraising, lobbying, food, and entertainment. So if you remove those numbers off of there, then you'll come up with a number. So let's say our project now is at $100,000 of eligible costs. So you would do the math. In this case, 20% of it can come from MotorCities. So this box, you would say that you're putting $20,000 in here for MotorCities, and you, the applicant, would cover the rest. So you would cover the $80,000 from yourself, from other funders, but you would be covering the rest. We would put our $20,000 in, you would cover the remainder. I'm going to pause there. Any questions on that math or that eligibility? Because I'm going to talk about what eligible costs are, but any questions on that? That's usually the biggest thing to clarify with people, is how that all works. Step right up, don't be shy. Okay. Yes.
Yes, Brian. sometimes the total project costs are a bit foggy. You don't know what you're going to have to pay for things down the road. How tight does that need to be? Does that top figure need to be?
Well, I mean, you want to present the project, and this is a great example of this is one of, this is project one of 15 projects that are on the list, or uh, as as Ali said, the now list at a facility. We know how that goes. If your organization has many, many things that you have to do, but for our purposes, you've got to identify what part of that are we going to apply to Motor Cities for. So if you're putting in, you're working at your museum, um, I'm going to get into ineligible because some things we can't do. For instance, we can't do capital gains. We can't use our money to purchase a thing. We can't say I'm going to buy a car with Motor Cities money. I'm going to buy this building with Motor Cities money. We've had examples even at the Gilmore where that was the idea that they're going to build one of those museums. We couldn't give the money to buy the museum or buy the property or build it, but we could give the money to support the fixes inside the building. We could deal with whether it's some technical stuff or exhibit works or that kind of thing. We can deal with it internally. So you want to narrow it down to what's the specific thing in my space that we're going to ask Motor Cities to fund. I gave the example earlier of the REO's museum getting a new ADA compliant restroom. So they were able to, itemize that and say, okay, we're doing just this bathroom and this is how much it costs. They're not saying, here's the whole building, here's just this part of it, and this is what we're going to do in this year. And that's what they submitted to us, and we asked if we would fund it. Most times that's how our projects go, where somebody's able to narrow down the thing they're going to work on for that year and give us the budget for it. Jeanette shared that we gave her a year of program support for the Rosie. So she identified, here we're going to go out to some luncheons, we're going to have some speaking engagements. I mean, it wasn't literally this is how many coasters we've got to put on the table, but it was more like this is generally speaking how much it's going to cost. You want to put that in your budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. So again, some common questions. This is a good one to clarify. The difference between total, and I just explained that, of what's eligible and what's not eligible. But here are the eligible things that you could include. And sometimes this opens up the playbook for people to realize what all they could throw in there. So contractors and consultants are going to work on your project. Materials, so things you actually have to purchase, and services. So if you're getting windows redone, somebody's got to come and do the measurements, and we got to buy the glass, somebody's got to come out and do the installation. This is all part of it. Services. Staff hours can be included with documentation. We have many grants who are able to do that. Your organization has to have the capacity to separate the work that you're doing for the grant. So that means that if you're an organization that has, say, timesheets or some other time tracking, you need to be able to say that of the 80 hours I worked in 2 weeks, or for some of you, 80 hours worked in 1 week, that 10 of those hours went towards the exhibit we're working on for Motor City. So if you're able to do that, then we can certainly accept the staff hours and related time. So the benefit rate for your staff as well. So sometimes that includes health benefits or other things. You can itemize all of that and submit it to us if you're able to track it. If you're not able to track it, then you're kind of treading into some deeper waters to try to submit it to us. So you need to be able to say, this is the method that I use to identify how we got those numbers. You can't kind of give a broad stroke. You have to say, this is how we tracked our time. We had time sheets, or we signed in and out, or our payroll system tracked it, and then you can do it. Another huge one, volunteer hours. Many of you are operating with small staff or no staff, but huge volunteer base. So if you're able to do the same thing there, where you're able to track your volunteers, have them come and sign in if they're there on Saturdays to clean up the yard and paint the side of the building, have them sign in when they come in and say, okay, everyone came today at 8 a.m. and they left at noon. We had 20 volunteers at 4 hours, so that's 80 hours of volunteer hours. You would be surprised, or some of you wouldn't be, how quickly that adds up. Majority of our grants, the volunteer hours are the majority of the time, because they're able to track them. They give a very favorable rate. I want to say in the $27 an hour range on the federal scale. So you're able to submit that and get a pretty favorable return on that. Volunteer mileage can also be included. So that means, hey, if that volunteer is coming to your site to paint the barn or to clean the yard, and they had to travel from 30 miles away, their mileage can also be tracked. Again, you would have to keep up with that. You have to say on this date, this person came, but this is their mileage to support it, but you can submit that. In-kind value, big time. Our nonprofits are hopefully very favorably seen with organizations that are willing to give you in-kind value of both goods and services. So some people may donate the glass to install your windows, or some people might donate the service, that you need to have done. If someone says, hey, I'm a concrete contractor and I'll come out there and pour your driveway or fix your paddock for free. I'll give you, what you want to do is document that with a letter from that person, a letter from that organization with the date and the work that they would have done. And that can be counted as well. So that could be a huge part of it. You could have $100,000 project, let's say our theoretical roof, but if the roofer donates the shingles or the tiles, or donates their labor or something along those lines, thankfully, as long as you get a statement from them that says that, you could very well turn that in and make up a big part of your project. So all of the outlay for the 80% doesn't have to be in cash. It could be this sort of combination of things where volunteers and donated goods and services could also be rolled in there. Ineligible costs. So this is what you want to steer away from, is incidental costs not directly associated with the project. So your organization is operating, you've got an office, and you say, well, Brian, we've got a grant from you. Here's our light bill. Here's our phone bill. Here's our internet. Here's our cable bill. Well, no, that is much more incidental than the specifics related to the project. You need to give us the cost of the project, not the cost of your operation to run the project. Even again, with the staff, you're itemizing the work that they did on the project, not their general salary, because we assume that they're not working 100% on whatever the thing is that you're doing. If they are, then you'll tell us that. Funds from another federal source. Again, we're federally funded, and the other big no-no that they have is if you're receiving funds from another federal source, and it's up to you to make sure you keep up with that, then you can't match those funds with our funds. So we can't give you $20,000 if you're also getting money from HUD to fix your roof. We can't give you the $20,000 because that's also another federal fund that we can't cross with. Activities, again, as I said, related to fundraising. So perceived as fundraising. A lot of time, our executive directors, our board chairs, and people like that, if they're putting their time in, we know how hard you all work, but it's a lot of times it's mixed in with the ask for the money. We need to separate those things out. We can't fund the fundraising. And again, food and beverage, general promotion. So you can apply to us for specific parts of an event or a conference. Let's say you're putting on a conference and one of the elements you want to fund is a tour. We've done that many times. So we would be willing to do the funding of an educational tour and all the costs associated with it. But MotorCity, this is not a backdoor way to get a sponsorship for, say a conference and say, oh, we'll go to MotorCities and get a grant for the conference. No, it has to be for a specific activity of the event, of the conference, that fits under our umbrella, not just general where, hey, we're going to put your logo on it and you're going to give us money. That's a sponsorship, and we can't do that with the Park Services money. We have to make sure we are doing it some specific element. And then utilities and maintenance costs cannot be easily identified. So back to my point about a light bill, a water bill, a phone bill, you might have a job that says we need to replace a water main in the center of our property in order to properly plumb our new bathroom or plumb the facility. But if you've got water bills for 6 months and you submit all those bills and say the water bills are a result of the work that is being done, that's not going to fly. You need to have specific, if there's a water bill because you had to call the department out to redirect some pipes or something like that, that's part of it. But if you're saying the general water bill for what you already do every day, that's not going to work. So you need to include specific to the project. I spend that time really detailing that because I just want to make sure people are pretty clear on what works and what doesn't work so that we don't lose anything in translation. But feel free to ask me any specifics about your project and say, hey, we're thinking of this, would this work? Most things work, these few things don't work. So we just want to make sure we're keeping those things separated. The next part of your application is your project summary. So this is where you get to tell your story. This is your time to tell us about your project. And of course, this will be different for every project. So you'll be taking the time to tell your story here, but this is what it looks like. This is what you will be evaluated on. This, is visible in the application. So there's no surprise there that our grant committee will be looking at these 5 areas and making sure they are being addressed. So is there relevance to the MotorCities mission? And either, revitalization, education, or tourism? Does the organization have the capacity to pull this thing off? So you would give us information about your organization, and we'll be evaluating whether your budget makes sense, whether your staffing makes sense, the timing, all those sorts of things for capacity. What's the sustainability plan? So what happens after we granted the money? That's not so much of an issue with the mini grants, but we're talking about the long term of the bigger grant. So if someone comes and says we want $15,000 for a new exhibit and we give it to them, does that mean that exhibit runs for 6 weeks, 6 months, a year, 10? What's the long term plan for it if we invest in a project? Again, this is important because the Park Service wants to know as well. The taxpayers' dollars have to be represented long term. How is Motor Cities and by extension the Park Service recognized? So we do request that there's some recognition based on what your organization can do. Some people have, here's a plaque, here's your logo, here's inclusion in the publication, here's a thank you at our big event, something that makes sure that you're recognizing that this project was supported by Motor Cities. And then the performance measures of the project. How are you tracking what you say you're going to get out of it? So if you install a new exhibit, are you tracking visitors? Are you tracking engagement? What is it that you're going to get out of this new exhibit besides just putting it in? So again, that's specific to your project. A lot of examples, but specific to your project. And this is how it'll look. Again, the summary paragraph is the shorter version. This is sort of your abstract. This is the short, punchy version of it. The project description is where you go deep into it. You can talk about project, timeline, background, the people who are going to be involved in it, to make sure that we know who they are, so their qualifications and things that might make it make more sense when you apply. So that's where you would tell that story. But again, this is exactly what it looks like on the site. And then you would attach, that sustainability plan. It could be a business plan, a master plan. What is the long-term, discussion about this project? How does it fit into the big picture? For those of you who are talking about preservation-related projects, we always want to see that. Is it a one-off? Do you have an emergency? We've had, hey, we need funding because this foundation is in desperate need of repair. We need to replace it immediately. But sometimes it's a more of an incremental update to a project. We need to repaint this. We need to rebuild this fence. We need to re-raise this barn. So it's the next step in a long-term plan. We want to see that plan to make sure we understand how it all aligns. How we'll be recognized. You can identify that there. It could be a media placement. It could be an event. It could be a brochure, a booklet, signage. It could be any of those things. It could be all of those things. So we just want to understand how you're going to do it so we can evaluate appropriately. Let's get to a little bit about performance measures. Again, they vary from project to project, but you'll be asking the question, how will you report on how your project was successful in preserving that artifact or attracting new visitors with your exhibit, or educating children if that's what you're looking to fund, or distributing materials. If you're saying we're going to create a flyer about something or a booklet about something, how are you going to get it out there? Or a movie, we funded some documentaries and things like that. How are you going to circulate it? So you are identifying this to us. You tell us how it's going to fit. So there's a space there for you to tell us how it's going to fit. Tangibly speaking, with this new exhibit, we look to increase our visitorship from 5,000 to 10,000. With this new education program, we look to service 20 local schools. With this support of this documentary, we look to distribute it on PBS stations in this many markets. So you're going to identify what it is that you expect to get done, and we'll track it there as well. So that way, when you get done, we'll compare our notes and make sure everything makes sense. And how are you going to do it? So if you're going to increase attendance, how are you going to track it? Are you clicking people as they come through the door? Are people signing in? Do you have a ticketing system? How are you going to report back and say attendance went up by this amount? Or if you're servicing school groups, are you going to be doing before and after surveys? Do you have feedback from your teachers? What are you going to do with that? If you're fixing a roof, then you fix the roof. That's pretty easy. You do it before, you do it after, and we'll know exactly what's going on. So it's specific to your project, but you want to tell us how you're going to actually perform the measurement. So a few examples, as I gave, performance measure might be that after installation of a new Buick exhibit, the museum attendance will increase by 2,000 over the next quarter. So you would say, I'm going to track museum attendance based on admissions and tickets sold from this period to that period, and that's what we're going to report on. So that might be what you put down in that section. Or for revitalization, the project will be to produce an operable architectural and engineering plan for a historic site. Pretty cut and dry. By the end of that, you'll have a plan that you can share with us, and you will have had mission accomplished on what you're going to have done. For tourism, you might say that this new Henry Ford and family tour, we got a few Ford folks on here, will deliver 1,000 participants in a year. So you would obviously create that tour, plan it out, and then produce the measurements for that by saying, hey, we got the visitors and then some. So success there. And this is how Motor Cities was involved. So those are just some examples. But again, we're wide open to your thoughts and ideas. So, I'll stop there again. If there are any questions on what I breezed through on your project description and how you would measure success on your project. Is there anything that sticks out that's like, hey, I don't know how I would measure success if we're going to build a new museum at the Gilmore Museum? How am I going to measure success? Is it visitors through the door or what? Or, I don't know. Are there questions or ideas about there that don't align with what I've already presented? Maybe Rebecca, in your oral history project, if we're collecting oral histories, is it a goal to collect 10 in a year? And you would say, okay, that's the measure of my performance, is I've done this many this year. And it doesn't mean that you failed if you don't. It just means that that's sort of the, you set a bar, you're trying to reach it, and everything that you do should be pushing towards it. I'm just throwing out examples based on what I've heard or, what we've discussed. Diane, if you were doing your placards and your signage around the stage, and of course there's a before and after with that's pretty cut and dry. So but any questions on what I've mentioned so far before we get into the budget part? Okay. All right, smooth sailing then. So in our budget, you would, of course, actually, this is a little sneak preview here, that it also shows you how you would end up reporting those measurements back. So literally self-contained within the application is even the report or the link to the reporting. So how you would tell us how it works. At the end of your whole grant, you end up going back and doing 2 reports, which is our performance measure. So, hey, what did I do? How much, what are the deliverables? How did it measure up? And then your partner feedback. So you'll let us know how the process was in Motor Cities. What could we have done better, worse, that kind of thing. So you would end up filling that out once your project is done. It said it's either due 45 days after completion or by November 15th of each year. Again, because we have to report to the Park Service by the end of the year what we've done. So just keep that in mind, that we start the journey. There's a report at the end. Again, pretty simple. In fact, I'll show you some snippets of the report as we go. This is also where you would upload a budget. We assume that it's going to be maybe a spreadsheet. It might be a document, but something that now itemizes expenses and details what you're going to spend on. Sometimes that budget is one item. Sometimes the person's saying, hey, we're going to buy an acrylic case for our new display. We already know the company. It's going to cost us $1,500. There's one budget item, pretty simple. Sometimes it's multiple things. We're going to put the roof on the building. We've got a budget from the roofer, we got a budget from the masonman, we got a budget from the wood worker, so all these people are going to be mixed in together, or if you involve your staff. So you've got to identify how detailed of a budget you need to work through, but that's where you would upload that for our review. As I mentioned before, your budget can include all of these folks, contractors and consultants and materials and services, and staff hours and volunteers and in kind. So if you add all that up, that's how you get to your project. You can include all those things in your budget. And then there will be a section for other supporting materials. I mentioned earlier, we have to identify IRS status. So you would upload the literal letter, your determination letter from the IRS here, your list of current board of directors so that we understand what your governance is and your oversight is. It may be a board, it may be a city council or city commission or something if you're involved in that, but someone who oversees your organization so that we understand what the trail is. And letters of support. For both grants, whether it's mini grant or challenge grant, there should be at least one person, we hope more, but there should be at least one person who's willing to offer a letter of support to your project that says, we support this project coming into our community, or we support this exhibit being built in our space, or whatever it may be, whatever you think is most effective. Some people send us something from the city of so-and-so that says we're in. Some people might send something from their governing body, from their organization that says that we support this programming, or some other, maybe an elected official that encourages us to really support something in their district. So it depends on where you're coming from and what you need to get done, but your letter of support should be there. And then there's an area for any other materials. So you might want to upload the blueprints. You might want to upload the additional master plan or additional letters of support, whatever you have that you think would further support your project and get us across the finish line. So it's up to you. It's optional, so it's not a requirement, but you can upload additional materials there for our review. And then, of course, reimbursement. So we're assuming that you're all funded and that the projects have been successfully accepted. When you're doing the challenge grants, 20% match, you can begin to request reimbursement once you start spending your money. So you've been awarded your grant, and you got $20,000 to spend on your roof, and you've got a payment schedule that goes 2 or 3 months to pay the roofer off. All you have to do is take the invoice and the evidence of payment and send us the request form to get that portion of the payment as we move forward. So we pay it in increments based on what you submit to us, again, and matching 20%. So you can start that immediately as soon as you get going. It needs to be supported again by a canceled check or donation letter or receipt or something that supports that the payment was actually made, not just the invoice, but where's the support that the payment went to them or has been realized or has been forgiven, in case of a volunteer or donated service. So, but you can begin that reimbursement. But those of you who are applying for the mini grants work where when you're accepted, you receive half of the money up front. So as soon as you sign the agreement, we're going to release a check for half of the whatever your grant amount is, and then you'll get the other half when you complete the project. So if you completed your $1,500 project, you get the other half. Or once you say that you completed it, then you send that information to us, and we'll send the other half back out. So that's pretty straightforward for some who have received those in the past. That's how it works, and it's only as quick as you turn it around. But keep it in mind as I put this bottom little note in here that all of these expenses are subject to review by Motor Cities and by the National Park Service. So especially larger projects, especially preservation, revitalization related projects that the National Park Service reserves the right to take a closer look or to make sure things are abiding by their guidelines. So just keep that in mind. People have to be patient sometimes, but you're typically pretty quick on the turnaround once the funding gets going, that you can go ahead and apply and move forward on that. So that's how the funding works. You either reimburse with the bigger grants or you get direct payment with our mini grants. And again, supporting documents can be things for direct expense like invoices from vendors or records of payment to employees. I mentioned in kind, that can be donated materials or communication based on, they made X contribution for Y project on this date. So we need to be able to align those things, not just that here's a general letter that ABC Construction supports the Packer Proving Grounds, but a specific date and time that says ABC Construction donated $10,000 worth of materials to the Packer Proving Grounds on July 26th. That way we can align it with your grant with the timing that we're trying to make sure everything lines up with. So when you're getting those donation letters, just make sure that they're dated. Same thing with volunteer timesheets or that kind of tracking. We're making sure that they're dated. It's not just what they did, but when they did it. So keep that in mind as you're tracking. And I mentioned again, the grant closeout. So these are the reports that you'll see on the tail end, and we're wrapping up our work here too. So it looks like this. You'll have a performance measure report that says, as you complete the project, that's a simple yes or no. In some cases, unfortunately, you might be in a position where you haven't, so you might need to indicate that. But primarily, we're looking for a yes, right? You completed your project. You will talk about those measurables that we talked about earlier. Were you able to achieve them? So, the example I gave, and just using Rebecca's as a possible, hey, you intended to do 10 oral histories, but we got involved and 7 of them got completed because of issues with the subjects or because of equipment or whatever. You would explain what happened along the way that may or may not have kept you from completing. You go on and talk about the measurement tools and what you did to get those results. So how did you measure attendance or impact of this project? And this completely up to you how you measure this, but this is where you would explain it. And then the likelihood that you will work with Motor Cities again, we would always love a very likely, but you never know. And this is where we'll also upload the information about your support, how we were recognized. So this is where we might see the plaque on the wall or the recognition in your newsletter or something like that, the letter that went out, and any additional files that you might want to add here, you could add there. So that's how the performance measure report looks. Just a few questions, pretty straightforward. And speaking of questions, my work is done, so I'm going to stop now for questions from you all. We have some time here, but I really want you to stop the screen share. Want you to feel free to shoot on specific questions about your projects or things that I may have covered, and you may be as you were processing and say, hey, wait a minute, what I'm here for. I'm also here anytime you want to email or phone call, reach out. I'll put it up again as we wrap up, but anything that you need from me, feel free to reach out. So again, questions right now, thoughts?
I got one.
Yes.
All right, I might have to sign off a little early, so I want to spit this out. For the mini grant, did you say that the funding term, for the actual grant activity was October 1st to September 30th? Or did I hear you say something about August 1st to August 1st?
So great question. I knew I would catch people with that. So the mini grants are October 1st to September 30th of this coming year. That is our fiscal year, and that's what we're awarding the money out of. So if you were to apply for a mini grant, it would be for a project that starts as of the 1st of October or after and ends by next September or before. So that's how that has to fit. The challenge grants are a rolling submission cycle that can be funded. They can be submitted at any time. And it's been like that for about a year. So we're open at any point for you to submit a challenge grant. And it would be funded based on when you submitted it. So I gave that example of if you submitted it on August 1st and it got accepted, then the letter and the agreement would say, okay, you have from August 1st of this year to August 1st of next year to get it done.
So that's for the challenge grants.
Yeah, that would be for the challenge grants.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, thank you for allowing me to clarify that again. And I'll put a screen up that shows those dates. In fact, I'll do it now while I'm fielding any other questions. But these are the relevant dates I was mentioning. Yes, Dave.
The mini grants are also subject to the 20%.
No, they're not. The mini grants are no match required. So there's just straight $1,500. There's a $1,500 maximum, but there's no match required. So you're not subject to the 20%. Is if you apply for a mini grant and you're approved, you'll get, let's say it's the maximum, you'll get $750 when you sign the agreement, and you get $750 when you complete the project.
Now, we are in an unusual situation located at the Gilmore Car Museum where we don't share in their admission records. We don't know how many people that hit the grounds at Gilmore visit our building, and we don't have a good way to keep track of that. How are we going to be able to respond to some of the requirements?
Good question. So your project, you were saying earlier, looking for some interpretive signage, and I know Sue can answer this, of course, but interpretive signage at the Pierce Arrow Museum. So I can think of some ways around it, but I'm going to hand off to Sue, and maybe you can.
Hi, David. I'll put in the chat. Let you and I connect. I can give you information about that, like all of our statistics and things, of people that come to the museum. I mean, we can't tell you specifically who goes into your building, but we can definitely, share admission ticket numbers with you.
Yeah. And sometimes you can extract sort of extrapolate on a reasonable percentage of those people that visit. Sometimes that's a good way to do it. Just say, well, let's assume that 20%, 25, 30%, whatever that came through the door, took a tour through your museum. Then you could maybe reasonably make that make that assertion. But at some point you do want to have some mechanism for tracking. Maybe there's a quick sign-in book. I know sometimes at the front door of the museum there's just a book that says please sign in, let us know where you're coming from, and that's really helpful. There's a great display of that at the Fort Piquette plant, where they've got this big map of the world, and all these pins showing where people have come from all these countries around the world. So it's sort of it's an official but unofficial way that's being tracked. So maybe a book would just keep up with that. Everybody doesn't do it, of course, and if you can't enforce it, then that can be a challenge. But there are a few ways maybe we should get there.
If you have a volunteer that can just have a clicker at the door, you can get for how many ever hours you can have a volunteer. That's another way you can at least get a basic count.
He's laughing like, so you're saying a volunteer there all the time, I can see where there's challenges for sure.
I mean, as many hours as possible.
Yeah.
At least during prime hours.
I've seen where, like, for park usage and that kind of thing, they've had a group kind of do like a representative sample. So you might commit a week where people would do it, and then you could compare your building to the total admissions for Gilmore or something, and say they are on average 20% or 50% come through our building too, or something like that. And it's intensive for a week, but then you have something to go by.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And it's the same way that they do an estimate that says 1 million people were at the Dream Cruise. You know, they're not going, "Doot, doot, 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 doot." They're going, okay, if this square mileage has this many people, you multiply that times this many miles, then, you know, you can get it done. So that could be a way to certainly do that. But again, great question. And we got to, you know, we would get specific about your plan and, you know, kind of think about how you can measure it. But we do those exhibits all the time, and they can give us estimates, and that's usually good enough. You know, as long as we're, especially if the goal is telling stories, you know, sometimes the deliverable is in fact the exhibit itself, that you did it. You know, your counterpart there at the Gilmore, we've done multiple exhibits with the Model A Museum there. There's another one of those buildings there, and they've got the same situation that you do, but we were able to get some information from them in the same method that Sue shared. They got a little bit from the main office at the Gilmore and extrapolated their numbers from it. Any other questions? I'm here all week, folks, so you don't have to worry. Okay, so once again, I shared the screen. We'll thank our sponsors who make it all possible, the UAW and Don Nicholson Enterprises. I'll put the screen back up again for these relevant dates. So right now, we are open for our mini grants that closes on August 15th. Those are the $1,500 grants, no match required. They cover October 1st through September 30th. The challenge grants are wide open, but I put this here just as a little bit of a nudge in that if you get your challenge grant in by August 25th, if timing is at all an issue, then they should be reviewed by September 15th. So it gives you an idea. But again, it's wide open. When you submit it, it can be reviewed once a quarter. So we just want to let you know, kind of generally speaking, where we are with that process, so that if you're waiting on it, you don't know if you got in on day 1 of the next quarter or if you're on day 89 of the next quarter and it's about to be reviewed. So I just want to make sure you know that those awards overall will be announced October 1st, and again will be completed by September 30th for those mini grants. So you can be, you know, as specific as you want to with me. Feel free to reach back out with questions, ideas. You've got our email, you know, but we're wide open. Great ideas that were shared here today. A great group of people from all over our region. You know, Lansing, from Flint, from Detroit, from Dearborn. I mean, it's great to hear all of your ideas and thoughts, you know, from the academic world, from the, you know, of course, the nonprofit, from the cities. And we got some, you know, our military, our social democracy story, and those are looking for stories of diversity. So, you know, I'm happy to hear a lot of this conversation, and looking forward to seeing your grants as they start to come in. So again, if there are any other questions, feel free to share them. You've got my contact information, and we're available to talk. Otherwise, thank you all for joining, and we're going to wrap this thing up, and then we'll talk to you soon.